Welcome, this is Mike Robbins, and today I thought I would show you how to install Visual Studio Code as a replacement for the PowerShell ISE. First of all, go to code.visualstudio.com and download the program for the appropriate operating system. Mine's defaulting to Windows because I'm running Windows 10. It's also available for OS X, for the 32 and 64-bit versions of Windows, and for the 32 and 64-bit versions of Linux. So I'll go ahead and download it. I am running the 64-bit version of Windows, and you'll notice the file name has x64 in it. So that's a giveaway that this is for the correct architecture. Although I could run the 32-bit version on a 64-bit OS, I recommend going ahead and installing the 64-bit version on the 64-bit OS. Okay, I'm logged into my computer as a standard user, so it's going to prompt me for admin credentials for the installation. The installation is pretty much a clicker size. You just click Next, accept the license agreement, and it's next all the way through. I'm not going to select any of these additional options. I only want to add it to my path. I've heard a lot of rumors about Visual Studio Code. I've even heard people say, oh, it's a lot like Visual Studio and you have to have a license for Visual Studio to install it. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Visual Studio Code is very lightweight. It's not bloated. It's not going to slow down your machine. It's not going to install SQL Server like Visual Studio does if you took the defaults on Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code, or VS Code as you'll hear it called, it is open source, so it's available for free. You can actually contribute to it on GitHub, and we'll also be installing the PowerShell extension, which will make it have IntelliSense and will make PowerShell the default since we're looking to replace the PowerShell ISE with VS Code. Okay, the installation is finished. I'll go ahead and launch it. It'll pop up with a documentation site. It's got some videos on there. These are very good. We'll jump back to VS Code. The first thing I recommend as far as getting it set up for PowerShell, and before we do that, I'll just say new file. What I want you to see is down here in the bottom right corner, it defaults to plain text. So it doesn't know if you start typing something that this is going to be PowerShell. Now you could press F1, and Control-Shift-P is another hotkey for the command palette, and you could say change language mode, and you could select different language modes. You'll notice that I'm not sure that PowerShell is in here by default. It may be in here, but we have not. Yeah, PowerShell is in here, so we could change the language mode, but without the PowerShell extension, it's really not functional as a replacement for the PowerShell ISE. So we'll click on the square icon here on the left-hand side, and it opens up a menu. PowerShell is actually the last one in the first page here, but this list defaults to the number of installations of these extensions. So a better way to do this is probably to go ahead and type in PowerShell. You can click on the extension and get some more information about it. You can view the contributions, the change log, the dependencies, and so on. We'll click on Install. You'll notice it's installing, and for it to take effect, we need to reload or relaunch VS Code. Now there's another extension I recommend, which is called VS Code Icons. So you can click on it and learn a little more about it. It gives you some fancier icons inside Visual Studio Code. So go ahead and install it. So instead of relaunching for every individual extension, you can just load the ones you want to load and then you can reload it. So it's going to reload the window. If you had anything open, it actually reopens whatever you had open as well. So you'll notice there's an Activate button at the top. I'll go ahead and click on that. This activated some icons that you'll see here in a minute once we start using VS Code for PowerShell. Something else I recommend, and I'm going to go ahead and close the menu there on the left. So go to the gear down here, select color theme, and since I'm replacing the PowerShell ISE, I want it to look and feel like the PowerShell ISE. So when you install the PowerShell extension, it installs the PowerShell ISE color theme. And so now we're starting to look more like the integrated scripting environment. So you could go to the welcome page, click on new file, you could say file and new file, but you'll notice you could say Control N as well. And VS Code has got a lot of hotkeys, so that's really helpful because every time you have to touch your mouse, it's going to slow you down a little bit. And you'll notice it still doesn't know, it's still plain text by default. So it doesn't know that this is going to be PowerShell, so we would actually have to go to F1 and say change language mode, and then change it to PowerShell, and it would actually launch a integrated terminal at the bottom of the screen, and then it would function more like PowerShell by default. But every time, so if we press Control N for another new tab, this new tab, even though it has the PowerShell console at the bottom, which is open for Untitled 1, you'll notice Untitled 3 is still plain text. We could click on it here and change the language mode as well. But there's an easier way. If you're strictly going to use this for PowerShell, or if it's going to be your primary PowerShell development environment, let's go ahead and go to the gear, go to Settings. And if you're in the top part of the screen here, you can actually press Control J to close out of the terminal, the PowerShell terminal at the bottom. We want to change the default language mode to PowerShell. It's in the list somewhere. I know it was called default language. So you can click on the pencil which says edit, and then copy to settings, so it copies it across to the right side here. Because on the left is all the defaults, and then the right are the overrides that you're making to those defaults. So now it's PowerShell. I could go up to File, and I could say Save, but notice there's Control S. So I'll actually click Control S. So now our default language mode is PowerShell. So if I open up another new tab from this point forward, it's going to default to PowerShell. And you'll see that in the bottom right corner here. And notice the icons. This is from the VS Code icons. If I opened up Explorer, you'll notice that it's got icons by the different languages, and the only thing we have open is the welcome screen from VS Code and some documents we haven't saved, but it knows that Untitled 1 is PowerShell, and Untitled 4 as well is PowerShell. Okay, there's a few other settings that I like to set. So let's go back to Settings. We'll close out of the Explorer here to make the screen a little bit larger so you can see it better. So you can actually start typing in the right-hand side, and it'll actually have IntelliSense for the things that you're typing. But I found it's still a little bit easier just to find them on the left-hand side with the search. So when I'm typing, I want it to format my code while I'm typing. So I can just select True, and it'll put it in the right-hand side. And then also format on paste. So if I paste some really nasty formatted code in, I want it to format that, so I'm going to set that to true as well. When you run something, so if I go over here to PowerShell and I type in PS, for example, and that is an alias, so you'll notice I got some squiggly brackets under it, and it tells me that PS is an alias for get process. So when I'm on that line, I actually get a light bulb, and I can click on the light bulb and say replace PS with get process. Now to run this, if I have the line selected, I can actually press F8, and it'll actually run it in the integrated terminal at the bottom. So the one thing I want you to notice though, if I start typing now, so if I type PS again, it actually changed my focus from the script pane at the top to the terminal at the bottom. And that's different from the way the PowerShell ISE works. So I'm going to go back to my settings, and I want to change that setting. So it's called Focus Console on Execute. So I'm actually going to set that to false. And you can change your default zoom level. So the zoom level is actually set to 0 at this point. So there's two settings I want to change actually. So if I want to change my zoom level, I can actually edit it here. So I can copy it to settings. It's still on 0. I could change it to 1 or 2 or so on. And then 1 increases the font and 2 increases it even more. But there's a really neat feature where you can actually change the zoom with Control and the mouse wheel. So if you edit this setting and set it to true, so now I can actually change it with the mouse wheel, and when I close and reopen VS Code, it's going to be back to the default, which is what I really like. Because when I'm in a presentation, I want to make my font bigger, but then when I'm normally coding, I want it to be the standard size. So once I save this, I can actually hold down Control and mouse wheel, and notice my font is getting bigger and smaller. But let's make it really, really big. And then I can actually press F1 for the command palette. And as I previously said, Control-Shift-P is another hotkey for that, but F1 is 2 less keys to have to press. So I can reload the window, and what that does is relaunch Visual Studio Code. And when I do that, notice my zoom is back to the default. So that's the reason I actually don't change this setting, but it's something if you want to change the zoom level and have it stay on a certain setting, you would want to change that. Okay, that is it for this video. I've got you up and running. You're ready to start writing your PowerShell code inside VS Code. I hope you'll visit my blog site at mikefrobbins.com or mrpowershell.com, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, leave me some feedback if you'd like to see more. Thank you.